She ran 2 miles barefoot. The ground was frozen in February cold, 28 degrees. She ran because the man who promised to love her was going to kill her. This is not a Western fable. It is the documented testimony of an escape. And for thousands of women, the most dangerous moment of their lives begins the second they choose to leave. For 1 in 4 women, and half of all transgender individuals, that desperate flight is not a story. It is a statistical likelihood. The question is not why they leave, but how they survive a system that makes escape nearly impossible and a moment of freedom that is the most lethal of their lives. This is the anatomy of a crisis where the greatest danger waits outside the front door and the brain itself can become a prison. Begins not with a fist, but with a bank account. In 99% of abusive relationships, the first weapon is financial control. A partner is isolated, their name kept off leases and titles. Their credit is ruined, their job opportunities sabotaged. They are given an allowance like a child for groceries and gas. This calculated dependency is the cage. By the time the physical violence starts, the victim has already been trained to believe they have nowhere to go and no way to get there. This is the foundation of entrapment. The psychological architecture is even more binding. Studies of brain scans show that sustained psychological abuse physically alters neural pathways. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for risk assessment and decision-making, becomes impaired under constant stress. The amygdala, the fear center, becomes hyperactive. The victim is literally being rewired to perceive their abuser as the sole source of both danger and safety. This creates a trauma bond, an addictive attachment to the very person who is destroying them. They aren't staying because they're weak. Their brain, under siege, is telling them survival means appeasement. So what finally breaks the bond? For many, it's a single unbearable escalation, a punch that lands near a child's head, a threat against a pet, the realization that the next time he might follow through on his promise to kill her. In that moment, a primitive survival switch flips. Planning is impossible. The escape is pure reaction. She grabs what she can, a child, a purse, sometimes just the clothes on her back, and she runs into the night, into the cold, barefoot if she must. This is where the system, theoretically designed to catch her, often fails. On any given day in America, domestic violence programs are unable to meet over 12,000 requests for help. 63% of those unmet requests are for housing. She might call a hotline, only to be told the nearest shelter is 60 miles away and full. She has no money for a hotel. Her family, isolated from her by the abuser for years, may not answer the phone. So she runs to the only public space open at night, a 24-hour store, a bus station, a police precinct. But here's the brutal calculus of survival. If she goes to the police, she triggers a legal process she may not be ready for. She might have to press charges immediately. She might have to face him in court without a lawyer. If she has children, Child Protective Services could become involved, questioning her for not leaving sooner. The system, in its clumsy attempt to help, can feel like another form of assault. So she waits, in a parking lot, in her car if she has one. The longest night of her life begins. And this is when the abuser, realizing his control is slipping, becomes most volatile. Research from the Department of Justice shows that a woman is 70 times more likely to be killed in the 2 weeks after leaving than at any other time. The threat is not an empty one. He will use every tool, tracking her phone, calling her family, driving her known routes to find her. The flight is not a single event. It is a relentless pursuit. Consider the documented case of a woman we'll call Elena. After 7 years, her husband's threats turned to action. He locked her out of their shared accounts and hid her passport. One night, he told her he would unalive her in her sleep. She waited until she heard him snoring, then slid out of bed in bare feet. She left her phone, her wallet, her coat. She ran 2 miles through suburban streets in 28-degree cold to a police station. Her feet were bleeding and numb when she arrived. The officer behind the desk listened, then asked the question survivors dread: "Why didn't you leave sooner?" That question misunderstands the entire reality. She didn't leave sooner because leaving is not an event. It is a process, a secret internal revolution that can take years. It is gathering hidden documents. It is memorizing a crisis hotline number. It is stashing $5 bills in a tampon box. It is the slow, painful rebuilding of a self that has been systematically dismantled. And at the exact moment she executes that escape, she is at her most vulnerable. She is traumatized, penniless and hunted. This is the setup for catastrophe. A person in acute crisis meets a system in chronic overload. The shelter beds are full. The affordable housing lists are closed. The legal aid waiting period is 6 months. And the man who wants her back or wants her dead is already in his car circling. The moment of escape, celebrated in films as a triumphant climax, is in reality the opening of a second, more complex battle. A battle for housing, for safety, for custody, for a life. So what happens next? When the cold concrete of the police station floor is the only safe ground she can find, and the gears of justice turn too slowly to protect her, the story doesn't end with the run. It begins with it. And for thousands, the next step is into a terrifying void, where the only thing waiting is the faint, desperate hope of a single, unlikely refuge. But the refuge is an illusion. The first stop for most survivors is not a safe house, but a bureaucratic labyrinth designed for people who have time and documents, two things she does not have. To qualify for emergency housing, she needs an official police report. To get a restraining order, she needs an address to serve the papers to. To secure custody, she needs a lawyer. And to pay for any of it, she needs money, the very resource her abusers spent years ensuring she would never have. The system, in effect, asks her to build a fortress while standing in the middle of an open field with a storm approaching. This is the first cruel revelation of escape. Freedom has a price tag. A single night in a motel can cost $100. A retainer for a family law attorney starts at $5,000. The average cost of relocating to safety is estimated at $2,000. For a survivor who has been financially abused, this might as well be $2 million. She is trapped in a catch-22. She needs safety to get money and money to get safety, so she makes impossible choices. She returns to the house to retrieve her social security card and risk another confrontation. She sleeps in her car in a Walmart parking lot if she has a car. She calls every number in her phone, hopping for a cooch. And here the statistics become living nightmares. Over 80% of homeless mothers with children are fleeing domestic violence. They didn't choose the streets. The streets were the only option left when the shelters said no. A shelter is not a hotel. It is a last resort triage center with strict rules, curfews, and limited stays. The average stay is 30 to 60 days. After that, she is discharged back into the same housing crisis that brought her there. The clock is always ticking. Now introduce the second player in this escalation, the abuser's legal strategy. When he realizes she is serious about leaving, his violence often shifts from the physical to the procedural. He files for sole custody of the children, painting her as an unstable, homeless flight risk. He drains their joint accounts, leaving her without funds for legal representation. He uses the family courts, which operate on a presumption of shared parenting, as a weapon to force continued contact and control. He doesn't have to hit her anymore. He can use subpoenas, custody evaluations, and mediation sessions to keep her trapped in his orbit, draining her resources and her spirit. This legal abuse is devastatingly effective. A survivor might spend months navigating courts, only to be granted a temporary order that gives her abuser supervised visitation, which still means she has to see him, coordinate with him, and fear him every week. The stress of this process is so profound that many survivors describe it as a form of re-traumatization. The court becomes an extension of the abusive relationship. And then comes the psychological boomerang. In the quiet of a temporary shelter room, the trauma bond reasserts itself. Her brain, conditioned for years, floods with doubt. Was it really that bad? He's the father of my children. He said he's getting counseling. Maybe I overreacted. This isn't weakness, it's neurochemistry. The addictive cycle of abuse and apology has literally wired her to crave reconciliation. Combined with the sheer exhaustion of being homeless and hunted, the pull to return can feel overwhelming. Studies show that a survivor attempts to leave an average of 7 times before achieving permanent separation. But what if she stays the course? What if she navigates the shelter, files the papers, and gets a temporary restraining order? This is when the danger doesn't recede, it mutates. He may escalate to what experts call separation-precipitated homicide. He has lost control, and for an abuser, that is an existential threat. He will monitor her movements. He will show up at her workplace. He will use technology, AirTags, spyware on shared devices, location tracking through family apps to stalk her. The restraining order is a piece of paper. It cannot stop a bullet. It cannot intercept a determined person who believes she is his property. Consider the case of a woman named Maria. After obtaining a restraining order and moving into a confidential shelter, her ex-husband hired a private investigator. The investigator followed a shelter staff member from a grocery store back to the secret location. 2 days later, he was at the door. The system had provided the legal framework for safety, but it could not provide the physical enforcement. Maria had to flee again, deeper into anonymity, her trust in the system shattered. This exposes the core flaw. Our response is reactive, not proactive. We wait for a crime to occur, then offer a patchwork of solutions. But by then, the survivor is already running on fumes. The energy required to stay safe, changing routines, documenting every interaction, living in a state of hypervigilance, is itself a full-time job. It leaves little room for the actual work of rebuilding a life, finding permanent housing, securing a job, healing from trauma. The financial devastation is often permanent. An abusive partner may have ruined her credit by taking out loans in her name. She may have gaps in her employment history because he forced her to quit jobs. When she applies for an apartment, a background check reveals evictions or debt he incurred. When she applies for a job, she cannot explain the years out of the workforce without revealing her status as a survivor, which invites stigma. The abuse doesn't end when she leaves. It becomes a ghost in her financial records, haunting her for years. And through all of this, she is supposed to be a parent. She must soothe children who are traumatized, confused, and acting out. She must explain why they left their home, their school, their friends. She must provide stability while living in a state of profound instability. The children are not just bystanders, they are secondary victims, and their needs add another layer of immense pressure and guilt. So we arrive at the pivot point. The greatest barrier to survival is not the abuser's violence alone. It is the collision of that violence with systems that are fragmented, underfunded, and designed for a reality that no longer exists. It is the housing crisis meeting the shelter shortage. It is the slow pace of the courts meeting the urgent speed of a stalker. It is a brain altered by trauma trying to navigate a labyrinth of legal and social service jargon. The survivor is not just fighting a person, she is fighting an ecosystem of failure, and waiting in the shadows of that ecosystem, watching for any sign of weakness, is the man who believes he owns her. He knows the system is tired. He knows she is tired, and he is counting on both to break her so that when he finally comes to take her back, she will have no fight left. The question is no longer if she can escape. It is whether anything exists on the other side of that escape strong enough to catch her before she falls. The shelter's 30-day limit is not an endpoint. It is an expiration date on safety. When it passes, she is discharged with a list of phone numbers and a bus pass back into the same city where he is waiting. This is the second cliff. The immediate crisis of escape has been managed, but the chronic crisis of survival begins. She must now find permanent housing in a market where waiting lists for subsidized apartments are 3 to 5 years long. She must find a job that pays enough to cover rent, childcare, and the lingering legal fees with a fractured work history. The math doesn't work, so she makes another impossible choice. She returns, not to him, but to the geographic orbit of danger, because it's the only place she can afford to live. This is how survivors become invisible. They are not on the streets, they are in precarious, unofficial spaces. They are the woman sleeping on her sister's couch for the 6th month, straining that relationship to its breaking point. They are the family crammed into a motel room paid for by a charity, 1 week at a time, never knowing if the funding will run out. They are what researchers call the hidden homeless. They have not vanished. They have been absorbed into the fragile margins of other people's lives, always one argument or one missed payment away from having to run again. But here is where the calculus becomes truly brutal. The very agencies meant to help can inadvertently funnel her back toward danger. Child Protective Services, if involved, may mandate that she provide stable housing to retain custody. To prove stability, she needs a lease. To get a lease, she needs a job and a security deposit. To get a deposit, she needs money. The clock is ticking, and the threat of losing her children, the very reason she ran, becomes a tool the system holds over her head. In a desperate bid to show compliance, she may sign a lease for an apartment she cannot afford, in a neighborhood she cannot secure, setting herself up for an eviction that will haunt her for years. Meanwhile, the abuser is often rebuilding his life with stunning normalcy. He may have a new partner quickly. He retains the family home, the social networks, the financial stability. He presents himself in court as the stable, wronged party. He tells mutual friends she abandoned the family. He weaponizes her instability, her homelessness, her trauma responses as proof of her unfitness. The narrative flips. She is no longer a victim fleeing for her life. She is a chaotic woman who made poor choices. This character assassination is a form of social murder. It isolates her further and makes finding community support, a new job, or even a sympathetic landlord exponentially harder. And then comes the attrition of the spirit. The constant vigilance, checking the backseat of the car, varying her route to work, jumping at sudden noises, erodes her mental health. Post-traumatic stress disorder is not a metaphor. It is a physiological state of hyperarousal that makes sleep difficult, concentration impossible, and trust a foreign concept. The depression that follows is not sadness. It is a heavy, chemical exhaustion from a nervous system that has been in fight or flight for years. She is told to heal, to focus on herself, but how? When the scaffolding of her life, home, finances, safety, family is gone, what self is there to focus on? This is the third, and perhaps most insidious, layer of the trap. The trauma becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Her PTSD symptoms may cause her to lose the job she worked so hard to get. Her anxiety may make her a difficult client for social workers. Her distrust may push away the friends offering help. The abuse has planted seeds that continue to grow long after she has left the garden, choking her efforts to rebuild. She is not just recovering from what he did. She is fighting against what he made her become in order to survive him. Now introduce the data that changes everything. Research tracking survivors over years reveals a shocking pattern. Economic instability caused by the abuse is the single greatest predictor of whether a survivor will return to her abuser. Not love, not weakness, money. When the choice is between returning to violence and watching your children go hungry, the calculus shifts. For a mother, her child's hunger pangs are more immediate, more real than the memory of a punch. The abuser knows this. He often offers not apologies, but groceries, not promises, but payment of a utility bill. He is buying her back one necessity at a time. Furthermore, the legal systems focus on individual incidents rather than patterns of coercion fails her. A judge may see a single argument, not the decade of financial control that led to it. They may grant him unsupervised visitation because he has a clean criminal record, ignoring the lifetime of psychological terror for which there is no paper trail. The system seeks discrete crimes. Abuse is a continuum. This mismatch means the legal outcome often validates the abuser's worldview, that his behavior wasn't that bad and that she is being unreasonable. So we arrive at the central, devastating irony. The act of seeking safety initiates a chain reaction that often leaves her more vulnerable than when she started. She traded the private terror of a single home for the public terror of an unstable, impoverished, and hunted existence. Her bravery is met with bureaucratic indifference. Her crisis is met with waiting lists. Her need for protection is met with pieces of paper that cannot stop a determined man. This is the wait it gets worse moment. It's not that one system fails. It's that all the systems, housing, justice, child welfare, economic support, fail in concert, creating a perfect storm of recapture. The abuser is no longer just a man. He is a symbol of the simpler, more predictable hell. And the wilderness of freedom is so hostile, so complex, and so utterly exhausting that his shadow starts to look like shelter. Yet against this titanic weight of failure, a counterforce exists. It is not a system. It is not an institution. It is the fragile, relentless network of survivors helping survivors. It is the former victim who is now a shelter advocate, working late to secure a hotel voucher. It is the pro bono lawyer who takes one extra case. It is the community fund that pays for a car repair so she can get to work. It is the tiny, human-sized interventions that plug the gaps the systems cannot. These are the moments that change trajectories. A 6-month rental subsidy that provides enough stability to complete a training program. A volunteer who provides childcare during court appearances. A support group where she hears her own story in another woman's voice and for the first time feels seen instead of crazy. This is the underground railroad of the modern era, built on whispered advice, burned phone numbers, and shared couches. The battle, then, is not won in the dramatic escape. It is won in the thousand mundane moments that follow. It is won by the combination of her superhuman resilience and the handful of people who choose to see her, not as a case file, but as a human being in a storm. The question that remains is whether those moments of human intervention are enough. Are they rare miracles, or can they be woven into the fabric of the system itself? The answer will determine not just her fate, but the fate of the 1 in 4 who will one day need to run. So what does survival, real survival, actually look like? It does not arrive with a dramatic rescue or a fairy tale ending. It arrives quietly in the form of a 12-month lease. A lease in her name only, the first month's rent paid by a housing voucher she waited 8 months to receive. The keys feel foreign in her hand. The emptiness of the apartment echoes. This is not freedom yet. It is the arena where freedom will be built, one terrifying, triumphant day at a time. The first night in that apartment, she will not sleep. She will check the locks 10 times. She will jump at the hum of the refrigerator. Her children, if she has them, will crowd into her bed, unable to process the unfamiliar quiet. This is the beginning of safety, but the body, trained for war, does not believe it. Recovery is the long, slow process of convincing her nervous system that the war is over. It can take years. The hypervigilance becomes a habit she must consciously unlearn. Now the real work begins, the work the crisis obscured. She must rebuild an identity that is not victim or survivor, but simply person. She must rediscover what she likes to eat, what music she enjoys, how she spends a Saturday with no fear hanging over it. These are monumental tasks. Choosing a paint color for the living room can trigger a panic attack because, for years, all choices were met with punishment. Learning to trust her own judgment again is a private, painstaking revolution. Financially, the hole is deep. The average survivor carries tens of thousands of dollars in debt accrued by her abuser, plus the costs of her escape. Her credit score is a ruin. Rebuilding it is a 5 to 7 year process of small, consistent payments. She may work 2 jobs, not for luxury, but to dig out from under the mountain of past due bills and legal fees. Economic justice remains the most distant horizon. And yet within this grueling landscape, life re-emerges. It appears in small victories. The first time she pays a utility bill with her own money and feels pride, not fear. The first school event she attends without scanning the parking lot for his car. The first laugh that comes from her belly, unprompted and unforced. These moments are not trivial. They are the bricks with which she rebuilds her soul. For the children, the path is parallel but different. They must process a betrayal by a person they were wired to love and trust. They may act out, become withdrawn, or struggle in school. Their recovery is tied to hers. Her stability is their foundation. Healing is not a return to a before. It is the creation of a new after, with scars that are acknowledged but no longer bleed. This is where the surprising data emerges. Longitudinal studies show that survivors who achieve stable, independent housing and maintain no contact with their abusers do experience significant recovery. Post-traumatic stress symptoms decrease, depression lifts, but the timeline is not months. It is often 5 to 10 years. The narrative of a quick bounce back is a myth. Resilience is not about speed, it is about relentless forward motion, however slow. Furthermore, a profound number of survivors, estimated at over half, channel their experience into advocacy. They become the shelter workers, the legal advocates, the hotline volunteers. They are the most effective agents of change because they speak the secret language of survival. They know which forms are needlessly complex, which policies re-traumatize, and what kind of help actually helps. The system begins to transform not when outsiders design solutions, but when survivors lead the redesign. Now let's return to the opening hook, the woman running barefoot. Where is she now? In the documented case, Elena secured a protective order. With the help of a victims' compensation fund, she covered therapy for herself and her children. She found a job through a program that partners with employers to understand trauma. 5 years later, she owns a small home. She is not over it. She still dislikes sudden loud noises, but she is safe. Her story is not an exception. It is a testament to what is possible when the fragmented pieces of support actually connect. But for every Elena, there are 3 others for whom the pieces never connect, who are still on couches, still fighting in court, still looking over their shoulders. The difference between their outcomes is not a matter of personal strength. It is a matter of luck, geographic luck, bureaucratic luck. the luck of encountering one compassionate person instead of an indifferent one. This is the ultimate indictment of our current model. Survival is a lottery. The resolution, therefore, is not a neat conclusion. It is a clarification. The crisis of domestic violence escape does not end when she leaves. It evolves. The question shifts from can she escape to can we build a world worthy of her courage? Can we create a continuum of care that matches the continuum of abuse? This means moving beyond crisis shelters to long-term housing solutions. It means training judges in coercive control, not just visible bruises. It means holding financial institutions accountable for recognizing and reporting economic abuse. The final, surprising detail is this. The most powerful predictor of a survivor's long-term success is not the severity of the violence she endured, but the depth of the community support she receives after. The human network, the friend who watches her kids, the boss who gives her a flexible schedule, the landlord who accepts a housing voucher, these relationships are more statistically significant to her recovery than any single therapy or legal intervention. The solution is fundamentally social. So we end not with her journey, but with ours. She has done the impossible. She has run through the fire. The question now is what we have built on the other side. Is it a barren stretch of bureaucratic wasteland, or is it a network of hands ready to catch, hold, and help rebuild? The Barefoot Run is only the first sentence of her story. The rest of the page is for us to write. The story of the Barefoot Run is not a period. It is a question mark addressed to all of us. It asks what we value, what we build, and who we choose to protect. For every survivor whose story we have traced, there are thousands more writing theirs in real time, in motel rooms, in court hallways, in the silent determination of a new morning. This is not a niche issue. It is a societal mirror. The gaps in our housing, our justice system, and our economic policies are not just bureaucratic failures. They are life-and-life chasms that we have collectively decided are acceptable. We have normalized a reality where the bravest thing a person can do is run for their life, and the most dangerous thing they can do is succeed. But the mirror also shows our capacity for something else. It shows the power of the single human intervention, the landlord who says yes, the employer who offers flexibility, the neighbor who notices. These are not small things. They are the critical infrastructure of survival. We cannot outsource humanity to a system. We must embody it. So what now? The work is twofold. First, support the organizations doing the frontline work, the National Domestic Violence Hotline, local shelters, and Housing First initiatives. They need funding, volunteers, and political will. Second, and perhaps more importantly, cultivate a culture of belief. Believe survivors when they speak. Understand that leaving is a process, not an event. Offer practical help without judgment. Be the community that catches. The next time you hear a story that begins with a desperate escape, remember the chapters that follow. Remember the economic warfare, the legal labyrinth, the hidden homelessness. See the full arc of courage. And then ask yourself, in that story, what role will I play? Will I be part of the barrier or part of the bridge? The run ends, the rebuilding begins, and it begins with us. If you found this dive into the unseen architecture of survival important, consider subscribing. We untangle the complex, human stories behind the headlines. Thanks for listening.